With their fourth full-length album Wurdiz, Dutch pagan sensation Sowulo lead listeners in a dance between fate and free will, backed by a cinematic orchestration full of pounding drums and mesmerizing strings. Despite being signed to by Norse Records, Sowulo does not restrict itself to a purely Nordic aesthetic or soundscape. Instead, through a premise that's very similar to both Nabala's or Heilung's and others, Sowulo seeks to transcend modern political borders and national identities to explore a more fundamental spirituality through music making, using ancient languages, instruments, and imagery primarily. With an incredibly ambitious Wurdiz, does everyone's favorite band of sun worshippers deliver on their promise of taking us on a cinematic journey through a dance of ancient instruments and modern production techniques? Let's talk about it. Just a little plug before we get started here. This Monday is another patron storytime, so if you'd like to hear some Icelandic folk and fairy tales this Monday, March 27th, 5 p.m. Denver, Colorado time, head on over to patreon.com/baldscald, sign up for the storyteller tier so you can get in on that. It was a really great time last time when we dove into some Norwegian fairy tales, where we learned that Norwegian farm dogs have a habit of pawing at firearms when there's danger afoot. So if you're at all interested in that, head on over to patreon.com/baldscald, sign up before this Monday the 27th, and you will be able to get in on that story time. Sowulo made their debut onto the dark folk scene in 2013 with their album Alvenrod, an album that, at least in my impression, leaned way more into the Wiccan aesthetics with the Wheel of the Year structure and pretty heavy Celtic influences. Fast forward through their 2016 Soul and 2019 Mon, and you can trace a pretty straightforward growth in both soundscape and compositional confidence. With each album being better than the last, though each having their own distinct charm, has helped them age rather well as the wheel of the year keeps turning. Despite this growth and development as musicians and songwriters, it must be said that Sowulo is incredibly dedicated to their Proto-Germanic, Indo-European aesthetic that they really haven't ever left behind. Their album art alone shows this quite well, but if I had to summarize their sound, Sowulo has always sounded like a petroglyph to me, rock art, in a way that other bands in the genre just don't capture. And to me, it really defines who they are or have been as a band for the last 10 years or so. Wurdiz continues this upward trajectory in both songwriting confidence and growth with the heaviest orchestration and instrumentation that we've heard yet from their discography. At first, this sort of caught me off guard, with both being used to and attached to their earlier, more intimate atmosphere. I wasn't sure if I was ready for Sowulo to get this big with their sound. But after a few spins, allowing myself to listen to this album on its own merits, and of course respecting Sowulo's rights as musicians to explore and grow, which I feel many listeners forget about all too often, I found myself thoroughly enthralled and immersed in this new direction, especially as the older sound began to crop up more and more as the album went on. Now, before we get into talking about the songs on this album, please be gentle on me. I am not trained in any way in either Old Anglo-Saxon or Proto-Germanic pronunciation, so I'm probably going to be slaughtering these pronunciations left and right, but I'm doing the best I can. I've got to juggle a lot of different pronunciations when reviewing music in this music scene. So bear with me, correct me if I get something horribly wrong in the comments. I'd love to at least correct it for the future. With that in mind, Wurdiz begins by lulling you into a false sense of security with Wurdiz' eerie string intro, before kicking down the door with a throbbing drumline that doesn't relent until about halfway through the album with Min Ban, where the tempo and texture seems to slow down, leading into a highlight of the album for me, which is Cheorfan. I feel like this track shows the perfect hybrid between that old Sowulo sound I so dearly adore and their ambitious new approach to songwriting and orchestration. The use of the string trio, for instance, in this track introduces a cold and meditative atmosphere that reminds me of string writing one would hear in Alifer Arnold's work. Between those slow string parts, the female vocal solos over the harp, the recurring heavy percussion, this track really just shows how dynamic and powerful Sowulo can be. From this point on, Wurdiz starts to slow down in a good way and begins to change up the orchestration and texture, which is a really nice change of pace from the first half of the album. This is where I'd have to put my only criticism of Wurdiz, and you guys know I don't do this often, where I think that the first half blends together a little too much. The drums and refrains all sound similar enough that the faster, heavier tracks just tend to be a little indiscernible from one another. This might just be because of how forward the drums are in the mix though, rather than the actual songwriting. Percussion has always been a part of Sowulo's sound, but in Wurdiz, they are mixed to be in the forefront of the sound palette, whereas in Mon from 2019, for instance, the percussion was absolutely a big part of the music, but it was more in the background or at least more complementary to the other instruments. In Wurdiz, in keeping with this cinematic epic orchestration approach, I would say that the way the drums are mixed can be a bit overbearing at points. So, I don't know, you guys comment down below if you feel the same way, or if I'm just being a little drumophobic here. Now, with that said, the last 5 tracks on Wurdiz, where the drums take a step back to let other instruments shine, made this more apparent to me when I got to this part of the album. These tunes have a lot more breathing space to me, where Sowulo's personality shines through the strongest through the other instruments. Das Weben Kraft shows a beautiful Nyckelharpa opening with another great string trio break towards the end of the track, while Ungewiss, Slip Nu Softa, and Aweknian lull the album to a slow, quiet, and meditative ending, with a little bit of a surprise in the last 3 seconds of the album. This eerie lullaby-esque track showcases the female singer over some really stellar lyre playing, all while backed up by that string trio that I absolutely adore. My own personal attachment to their older sound aside, Wurdiz is an impressive and ambitious album that, to me, delivers on Sowulo's upward trajectory that you can trace over their previous 3 albums. While I always admire seeing such a beloved band grow and experiment, for those like me, I do hope we see more slower and intimate tracks to enjoy on future albums, though there are plenty hiding in the back half of Wurdiz too. That said, the songwriting and orchestration are more confident than in previous albums, and the exploration into a more cinematic or epic soundscape through use of more advanced production reminiscent of movie scores will no doubt leave plenty of listeners wanting more. All in all, Wurdiz is a must-listen for any fans of the dark folk genre, as is their whole discography over the last 10 years. If you haven't given Sowulo a listen at all yet for some reason, just put on their first album and take yourself on a journey all the way up through Wurdiz. You won't be disappointed, they're a pretty special band. So everyone, that wraps up our review of Sowulo's latest album, Wurdiz. I look forward to seeing them at Midgardsblot, where they will no doubt leave a very powerful impression on those who attend. If you want to support the channel, please like, subscribe, share, or comment. And if you'd like to support the channel more directly, head on over to the Patreon over at patreon.com/baldscald. This Monday, we have another patron story time with me and my wife Alyssa, and Cricket, of course, where I read folktales from around the Nordics. This month, we're diving into some Icelandic folk and fairy tales at the request of one of the patrons, so absolutely looking forward to a good time there. So, Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope to see you next time on the Nordic Sound Channel.